Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're looking at some truly imposing structures, the castles and town walls of King Edward in Gwynedd.
That's right. We're talking Harlech, Beaumaris, Caernarfon, Conwy.
Yeah.
Just incredible sites.
And UNESCO actually calls them the, quote, finest examples of late 13th century and early 14th century military architecture in Europe. High praise.
It really is. And you have to understand, these weren't just castles built for defense in a general sense. They were part of a very specific, very aggressive mission.
Okay.
They were built by Edward III right after his conquest of North Wales in 1282, part of this huge project sometimes called the Ring of Iron.
The Ring of Iron. Sounds ominous.
Well, it was intended to be. It was about permanent control, colonization, really.
Yeah.
Establishing English administration, encouraging English settlers,
Yeah.
basically locking down North Wales.
Okay, so let's unpack that because it sounds like much more than just military strategy. We're talking about a massive, incredibly expensive imperial statement.
Absolutely. It's architecture as power projection. And Edward III, he wasn't new to this. He had a lot of experience with warfare, sieges.
He'd seen things on the continent.
Exactly. He'd seen sophisticated fortifications in Europe, like Aigues-Mortes in France, a huge planned town. And he'd built similar fortified towns, bastides, in his own French territories in Gascony.
So he had a kind of blueprint in mind for Wales.
Pretty much. He took that bastide concept, these planned fortified towns, for settlers, and applied it to North Wales after the conquest. The Statute of Rhuddlan in 1284 carved up the area into English-style shires.
Caernarfon, Merioneth, Anglesey.
Right. And these new castles and their walled towns became the administrative centers, the hubs for English control and settlement.
Okay, let's talk about the sheer scale. The logistics must have been, well, mind-boggling, getting workers, material.
Absolutely enormous. It put a huge strain on, well, everything. Royal money, the national workforce. Sheriffs across England were ordered to round up workers.
It's a huge numbers.
Yes, staggering numbers of carpenters, stonemasons, ditch diggers, mustering them in places like Chester and Bristol, then marching them into Wales. Imagine that.
And the cost. You mentioned expensive. We have figures, right? Caernarfon was something like 15,500 pounds. Conwy similar.
Around that, yes. 15,500 pounds for Caernarfon Castle and walls, maybe 15,000 pounds for Conwy and its walls.
How much money was that back then? Put it in context for us.
Well, think about this. A top nobleman's annual income might be 500 pounds. By 1304, Edward had spent at least 80,000 pounds on the Welsh building program alone.
80,000 pounds. How does that compare to his total income?
It was nearly 6 times his usual annual income for the entire kingdom.
6 times. That's unbelievable. How on earth did they manage that?
Heavy taxation, borrowing huge sums, basically running the crown deep into debt. But that was the price Edward was willing to pay for, permanent domination.
And the towns themselves were key to that domination, not just the castles.
They were the mechanism, yes,
Yeah.
designed to create these pockets of English control.
And native Welsh people were actually banned from living inside.
Strictly banned, yes. The success of this colonization strategy, well, you can measure it by how many plots of land or burgages were rented out to English settlers.
So did it work? Did settlers flock to these new towns?
It varied quite a bit. Conwy was a port, quite bustling, that had 99 burgages around 1295. That suggests it was thriving.
But Harlech?
Harlech, not so much. It's more isolated up on that dramatic cliff. By 1305, it only had about 24 and a half burgages recorded. So same level of investment in the castle, but much less social success in the town itself.
So an incredible cost, uneven success in settlement. But let's get to the architecture itself. What made these castles the zenith of military design? What innovations did all that money buy?
Okay, militarily, they bought the absolute cutting edge. The big thing historians point to is a systematic use of concentric defenses.
Meaning layers.
Exactly. An inner ring of high walls, completely surrounded by a lower outer ring. Everything calculated so defenders on the inner walls could shoot over the heads of those on the outer walls. Double the firepower.
And Beaumaris is the classic example of that.
It is, often called Britain's most perfect example of symmetrical concentric planning. It's almost perfectly geometrical, like a fortress designed on a drawing board.
Seems almost unbeatable. What else?
Well, they moved away from the old central keep idea. Instead, the main strong point became these massive, incredibly elaborate gatehouses, fortresses within fortresses, really.
Making the entrance the hardest part to crack.
Precisely. Plus, advanced features like purpose-built firing platforms for archers all along the walls, and barbicans, those defensive outworks protecting the gate. And Conwy has the earliest stone machicolations in Britain.
Machicolations? Remind us what those are. Sounds nasty.
They are nasty. Basically, openings in the floor of an overhanging part of the wall. Defenders could drop rocks, boiling water, anything unpleasant, straight down onto attackers trying to get close to the base of the wall.
Okay, so militarily advanced, intimidating. But there's a critique now, isn't there? That maybe they were too advanced, too big.
That's a really important point modern historians make, yeah. A critical nuance. While they were undeniably powerful, the argument is they were often much larger than strictly necessary for the kind of threats they usually faced from Welsh forces.
And that size created problems.
It did. It made them incredibly expensive and difficult to maintain properly over the long term. And crucially, very hard to garrison effectively. You needed huge numbers of soldiers to man those vast walls, which was often impractical or just too costly, especially in peacetime.
So if they were maybe over-engineered for pure defense, that points back to their other role, the symbolic palatial one.
Exactly. They weren't just barracks. They were designed to function as royal palaces, places the king and his court could stay in safety and, importantly, in splendor.
Any specific examples of that palatial side?
Oh, Conway's a great example of this blend. It has what's considered the best preserved suite of medieval private royal chambers in England and Wales.
Really? Inside the fortress?
Right inside. Great halls, private chapels, apartments, even a special walled garden for the queen, tucked into the fortifications. Imagine the garden within those imposing stone walls.
A queen's garden. That contrast says a lot, but Carnarvon takes the symbolism even further, doesn't it? It looks different.
It absolutely does. Carnarvon is a statement piece. The builders deliberately used unique, really expensive features.
Like the colored stone.
Exactly, that banded stonework using different colors. And the polygonal towers, not round ones, even statues of eagles. It was all meant to evoke, well, imperial power, Roman power, maybe even Arthurian legend.
Architectural propaganda, basically.
One gate was even called the Golden Gate, deliberately referencing the main gate of Constantinople. Edward was linking his conquest to these grand, ancient imperial traditions.
And the locations themselves were symbolic, too, right? Built on significant Welsh sites.
Very deliberately. Many were built right on top of places important to the defeated Welsh princes, politically or spiritually. Conwy, for example, was built directly over Aberconwy Abbey.
Forcing the monks to move?
Forcing them to move, yes. The castle physically and symbolically replaced the Welsh religious and political presence. It was a very clear message.
Now, behind all this design and construction is one key figure, Master James of St. George. Tell us about him.
Master James, yes. A Savoyard engineer, his official title was Master of the King's Works in Wales. He oversaw the whole massive project.
So was he the genius architect, the designer, or more of a project manager? There's some debate, isn't there?
There is. It's a fascinating question. We know he brought architectural ideas from his home region, Savoy things, like certain types of towers and arches you see in castles there, like Chalon.
So maybe he imported the style.
Possibly. Or perhaps his real genius was less about inventing new designs and more about the incredible feat of management, coordinating everything.
What made the management so remarkable?
Just the sheer scale. Getting the right stone, quarried and shipped, importing timber, organizing and paying thousands of workers across multiple massive sites, often in hostile territory. It was like running a giant medieval construction corporation. He ensured consistency and quality across the board. Maybe the ideas for things like concentric walls were already circulating in Europe, but he was the one who could actually build them on this scale, reliably.
An incredible operation. And it got tested pretty quickly, didn't it? How did the Ring of Iron hold up when the Welsh rebelled?
Almost immediately, yes. The big test was the rebellion led by Madog ap Llewellyn in 1294-95.
Did the castles work?
In part, yes. Conwy and Harlech were crucial. They held out because they were on the coast. The English could resupply them by sea, which meant the Welsh besiegers couldn't starve them out.
But Carnarvon wasn't so lucky.
No, Carnarvon was a major setback for Edward. It was still under construction, not finished. Welsh forces actually stormed it, sacked the town, and burned the building works.
Ouch, that must have stung.
Hugely embarrassing. It really pushed Edward to pour even more money in, to accelerate the building program. It's actually why he finally started work on Beaumaris, which had been planned but delayed because of the cost.
But even then, they weren't all fully finished.
That's right. Despite that push, work really slowed down and pretty much stopped by 1330. Both Carnarvon and Beaumaris were never completed to their original full designs. The money just ran out eventually.
Okay, fast forward about a century. The Glyndŵr Rising in the early 1400s. How did the castles fare then?
They were tested again, and the record was, let's say, mixed. Only partially successful, according to some historians.
How so?
Well, Harlech, despite looking so formidable, was actually captured by Owain Glyndwr's forces. Apparently, it was poorly equipped and garrisoned at the time.
Glyndwr took Harlech. Wow.
He did. It actually became his main headquarters, his capital, for several years, a huge symbolic victory for the Welsh cause, till the English finally besieged and retook it in 1409.
So after Glyndwr, did they see much action before, say, the Wars of the Roses?
Not really. They mainly stood as symbols of English authority, garrisons in a largely pacified landscape. But then, yes, the Wars of the Roses dragged them back into conflict.
Their last big military role.
Pretty much their final and quite dramatic military chapter. Harlech, again, played a starring role.
Always Harlech.
It seems so. It became a major refuge for the Lancastrians. In fact, it was the very last major Lancastrian stronghold in England and Wales to hold out against the Yorkists.
How long did it last?
It surrendered in 1468 after a really long siege, months long. And that specific siege is famously said to have inspired the song Men of Harlech.
Ah, okay. So after the Tudors take over in 1485, Henry VII having Welsh roots, things calm down. What happens to these huge, expensive castles then?
Well, predictably, decline and neglect. With the Welsh-English tensions easing, their primary military purpose just evaporated.
The funding dried up.
Completely. We saw maintenance budgets were already falling way earlier. By the 1530s, official reports were calling many Welsh castles mush runus and fair in decay. Beaumaris was described as utterly decayed by 1609. They just weren't a priority anymore.
Until the English Civil War gave them one last, unexpected hurrah.
Exactly. Royalist forces occupied them during the war. But when Parliament won, they wanted to make sure these strongholds couldn't be used again. They ordered them to be slighted.
Slighting. That sounds destructive. What did it involve?
It means deliberate destruction to make a fortress unusable for war, usually knocking down key sections of walls, blowing up gatehouses, rendering them strategically useless.
So were they all slighted?
Partially. Conwy and Harlech definitely suffered some slighting, but Cynarfon and Beaumaris got off relatively lightly.
Why was that?
Mainly because Parliament was worried about a potential royalist invasion from Scotland. They decided it might be useful to keep a couple of major strongholds in North Wales intact, just in case. That fear basically saved them from major demolition.
Lucky break for them. Which led to their next phase, becoming picturesque ruins.
Exactly. In the 18th and 19th centuries, they became incredibly popular subjects for artists in the picturesque movement. Think J.M.W. Turner painting these romantic, ivy-clad ruins.
Ivy looks nice, but probably not good for the stonework.
Definitely not. By the 1830s, parts of Caernarfon were literally starting to collapse. Emergency repairs were needed. The picturesque decay was becoming actual decay.
So when did serious conservation start? Who stepped in?
It really took until the early 20th century for the state to get properly involved. First, the British state, and later Caddo, the Welsh Heritage Agency, they started massive, systematic conservation work.
What did that involve? Must have been huge projects.
Oh, enormous. Repairing stonework on a vast scale, clearing away centuries of vegetation, digging out moats that had completely silted up like at Beaumaris. A huge investment to stabilize and preserve them.
And that's why they're still so impressive today, leading to the UNESCO World Heritage status in 1986.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
UNESCO cited not just the architecture itself, but their scale, their completeness relative to their age, and also the incredible amount of historical documentation we have about their construction. We know so much about the process.
And CAD manages them now, making sure the interpretation includes the full story.
Yes, they manage the sites today, and they've worked hard to present the history more fully, acknowledging the impact these castles had on Wales and the Welsh people they were built to control. It's a much more nuanced story now.
So, looking back at Edward's grand project, this incredible military engineering, but also this tool of domination, what's the ultimate takeaway?
Well, you see this duality, don't you? He built these incredibly advanced military bases, but they didn't, in the long run, secure English dominance purely through force. They were too expensive, arguably too big.
Their lasting impact is more symbolic, the engineering marvel.
I think so. Their enduring power is in that sheer ambition, the architectural statement, the engineering genius, even if the imperial project itself evolved and in some ways failed in its initial aims.
Which leads to a final thought, perhaps for you, the listener.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Considering the absolutely crippling cost at £80,000 plus, vastly exceeding his income, and the fact that Caernarfon and Beaumaris were never even finished, did Edward I overreach?
A financial and strategic miscalculation, despite the amazing structures.
Possibly. Was pouring so much into these Welsh castles, this ring of iron, ultimately a mistake that hampered him later, draining resources needed for other things, like his very expensive wars in Scotland. It's something to think about the true cost of these magnificent stones.
A fascinating question indeed. The legacy in stone is undeniable, but the legacy on the balance sheet may be less clear-cut. Definitely look up pictures of these sites if you haven't seen them. They really are something else. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.